Hey folks, Jimmy here, aka Palette of the Dead. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to the latest issue of Warhammer Age of Sigmar Stormbringer magazine. Now, as per usual with all these videos, if you like them, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and drop a comment down below. I love hearing back from you guys. It goes a massive way to helping out the channel too. Now, this week we are on issue 62 of Stormbringer magazine. It is a paint issue, so we get 2 pots of paint and we get the magazine. Not a lot else to it. It's a little bit disappointing. It's also a little tiny bit thin on the ground in terms of lore and stories and such like, which is yeah, a bit rubbish for £10. So obviously we get 2 paints. So the first paint we get is White Scar, a nice bright white paint, as opposed to Corax White, which is an off-white and a lot thicker. White Scar's a thinner paint and a fair bit brighter. So if you are going to go for any Zenithal highlights, maybe going up to a Corax White, and if you want any really super bright areas, White Scar does very well before you put any contrasts over it. But yeah, it's okay. The other paint we get is Silabite Green. Now, it's a fairly decent paint. I have a pot of this, which I've had since Leagues of Votann came out, and yeah, it's a decent colour. It's a nice shade. It's something else. What you're going to use it for in the magazine is where I kind of am a little bit weirded out. I don't 100% know because I've not fully read the painting guide for this week, but yeah, it's a good colour. It's a nice colour. It's a weird colour. It's very good if you're painting up Seraphon or Leagues of Votann and such like, and you want that jade effect. So even if you're putting it on, say, like Warp Lightning Cannons from the Skaven or something like that, it could work very nicely as well with them. But yeah, it's near enough it. So yeah, it's just a good paint, isn't it? Anywho, moving on to this week's issue. First off, we are greeted by the anatomy of an Orc, which obviously is done to be written in the style of a author. So in this one, it's a scholar of Herman Splott, who has dedicated the last 24 years to the study of the enemies of Sigmar, gathering what scraps of information that he can. Of these enemies, the Orc is one of the most numerous. It is hard to say that they have an ideal habitat, for they appear everywhere. So, neither fire, barren plain, nor frigid tundra can slow their expansion. Despite much inquiry, he has not found out anything of how they spread. So, Orcs obviously been a very unusual kind of adaptable foe, so they can kind of populate any area. It just generally doesn't really bother them, so they do appear pretty much everywhere, and they are very unusual. So yeah, they have a very uniqueness to them, and you get a bit more information on the other side and some nice little sketches, including, you know, a cruel boy, you know, putting a knife to one of the Cities of Sigmar soldiers and stuff like that. You also get the artwork of the going up against Seraphon. Always really nice. Pretty decent stuff, and it's a good little bit of lore behind what the Orcs are all about. Moving on though, we have the ideas of how to do things like your Crusades and War. So, Crusades are very big at the moment because of the Dawnbringer Crusades, and the idea that Stormbringer magazine is all based off of the idea of the Dawnbringers, and so it goes like that. So, the Dawnbringer Crusades are the Crusades that depart from the Cities of Sigmar that will utilise the tactic that is most effective to safeguard themselves and their holy mission. So, you roll a 6, well, a d6, and you'll get your kind of tactic. So whether it's, you know, allying with another great army from the Army of Order, and having the generals been plotting for months and such like, you can get a bit of information about that. You can also do things like their mortal enemy, so where the enemy that is most kind of detrimental to them, so their Crusade may go up against Skaven, Nighthaunt, Sons of Bahamut, or the Soulblight Gravelords or something like that, and they may get attacked on a very regular basis by them, and you do your campaign like that. bit of a different way of doing it. So you also get to do exactly the same for your war, which if you are a Forces of Destruction player is obviously what you're going to be doing quite a bit. So your war is your army that is facing off against certain things. So you will have your own tactics, whether it's just brute force or whether it's using the grots and such like. And you also do your mortal enemies, whether it's soggy gits, stunty gits, leafy gits, shiny gits, bony gits, uskits. So, you know, you can go up against themselves, so other clans of Oryx. Bony gits obviously being things like your Ossiarch Bone Reapers, shiny gits, your Stormcast Eternals, leafy gits, the Sylvaneth, stunty gits, the Cadron Overlords, and the soggy gits being the Ideneth Deepkin. So, a little bit of a way of playing and kind of expanding the story for yourself and your own narrative within the game. How you want to play it is all based on if you use that or not. Anywho, moving into paint. So we obviously get a bit more about painting technique. So filling your paint is a very, very handy trick. You need to make sure you're getting the right consistency and don't overload your brush. Overloading your brush can lead to bristles splitting and separating and such like, and paint drying between them and knackering the brush up, and then you end up spending a fortune on brushes like I do. Now, obviously filling your paint too much can also make it very watery, so you need to try and get that right consistency. I'm not going to lie, it will take you some time. It can be, it's a very fine line between just right and too watery. So it's all about testing and trial and error more than anything. Then obviously we get more information about how to utilise the different aspects of your brush, because you don't have to paint just with the tip. You can utilise the edge of your brush. So going over any areas that are quite meant to be kind of sharpish, really, so the edges of cloaks and shields and such like that, using the edge of your brush to highlight those areas is very, very handy. And it's a trick that I must admit I've been doing without realising for a very, very long time. And then there is rounding. So rounding will go over anything that's a little bit more raised and a little bit smooth and not got that much of a sharp edge. So anything that's more of a curve as opposed to more of a triangle. So utilise that how you will, but obviously do not overload your brush, because if you overload your brush, you overload your paint, and your paint can mess up very, very easily. Anywho, moving on, highlighting with metallics is obviously going to be a major thing. So using your metallics to highlight certain areas is very, very handy and very, very useful. And you just need a little tiny bit of it. Now, the thing with thinning paints, you don't need to thin metallics very often, because most metallics are fairly thin. If you thin them too much, they separate as well. So be warned, just be careful. And you know, metallic flakes are in metallic paint, so you do have to contrast with that. Moving on though, we get our paint guide about painting faces. Now, I do not know why I do not like this paint scheme of face. So if you're utilising white scar to highlight areas of face, I genuinely don't know why you would be making it look like the Babadook. It just puzzles me. I think for this magazine they are over edge highlighting things. You do not need to go that heavy with edge highlights, in my opinion. Subtlety can be a lot better. If you're going with hard edge highlights all the time, it can look a little bit jarring and it doesn't blend very well, because not everything is going to have that hard edge highlight. So for me personally, I would dial it back a little bit. I wouldn't highlight a face that heavily. You know, a little tiny bit, but yeah, you just don't need to. In my opinion, you don't need to highlight as heavy as that. Anywho, moving on. Painting with white scar and cyberite, when I can learn to speak, green. Utilising your white scar on things like the edge of bones and teeth and such like that can work very, very well. Obviously, personally for me, I think subtlety is key, so keep it to a fairly minimum. You don't want thick blobs of white all over the place, because it will look a bit weird and a bit jarring and yeah, just a bit off-putting, in my opinion. when you're doing it over things like the legs of animals and such like that as well, you don't need to go too heavy. Going too heavy can make it look a bit off and a bit wrong. Now, the other thing that I'll say is, using your Cyberite, when I can really say it properly, it will help. Green. I also would say subtlety is key. So over things like your Griffhounds and Griff Charger necks and then plumages and such like that, a little tiny bit of it goes a long way. You don't need to use massive amounts of paint. But it's up to you. How you want to paint is your choice, in my opinion. If you want to go for the sharp, bold edge highlights, you can do. For me personally, I just don't think they sit quite right. Anywho, moving on. That's your gallery. So utilising them paints. Up to you how you want to go about doing it. It does look all right. It doesn't look too bad. There are just little things that I personally, I think it should just been dialed back a little bit. Then we get more of our tactics. So we get more tactics for the forces of destruction. So our sneaky snufflers. And the squig herd themselves, they are high damage, durable, but a pain in the ass to control. Then you got your battle plan. So flame and fury, ashes to ashes. So 4 objectives. Order, destruction on each side, utilising this time around 3 heroes and 5 troops for each army type, which is pretty damn cool. And obviously we're ramping it up a little bit and expanding and getting bigger and bigger and bigger armies, so it keeps on going and going and going, which is really good fun. And have a bit of fun with it. Anyway, really enjoyable. Obviously you can name your heroes if you're playing it that way, or create your own version on Excel if you're going to replay it quite regularly. And then we move on. Next week we get our Arcanaut Admiral, a pretty cool mini. I do genuinely like the Arcanaut Admiral. It's got quite a lot of nice little bits of detail to it. The week after though, week 4, 64 should I say, you get the Loon King Scragrot, which is a pretty damn cool mini. So I'm looking forward to this one. It should be really good fun, and a nice enjoyable mini as well. Now that is it from me. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you sometime soon. Bye bye now.